He's looking for someone to do an experiment with.
What kind of experiment?
Well, it involves an operation, and a lot of things even I don't understand. But it's very safe, and it's worked very well before, except it's only worked on laboratory animals.
Animals?
This time, Dr. Strauss has permission to try it on a human being. And if it succeeds, it can make that human being very smart.
Dr. Strauss wants to do the experiment to me?
Tonight's film is about intelligence. How do you say intelligence in Korean?
지혜롭다.
지혜롭다. 지.
It can be done two words. 지혜.
Aha. 지혜. What is 주인공? I'm not pronouncing it right, probably. 주인공.
주인공?
Mm-hmm.
You mean the hero? Hero of the movie?
No. It's a term in Korean Seon Buddhism. Juingong. Maybe that's not. It's Juingong in the English transliteration.
Emptiness?
It's emptiness, but it's the root intelligence of the being, the real being. The equivalence in the Vedic system is Chaitanya. Chaitanya is the source of intelligence. Did you know that? Yeah. Of course you would. There is a difference, however, between the understanding of intelligence in the ancient world, both in the Vedic and Shaivite traditions and Buddhist tradition, and modern intelligence. The modern concept of intelligence is very flattened, very one-dimensional, and the fantasy is that it's based on neuronal activity. It all has to do with the brain. But the ancient world recognized that the intelligence uses the brain in the same way you'd use a computer, but your computer doesn't have the intelligence. Hopefully you're more intelligent than the computer, and you use it for your purposes. You are not used by its purposes. However, they were also beyond ego consciousness in the old world, and if you are in ego consciousness, then indeed you only have access to pseudo-intelligence. Why? Because the ego's intelligence has been appropriated by the censor and its two henchmen, the paternal and the maternal superego. And so it is their intelligence that's operating your brain, which is why you'll fall into paranoia and self-distrust and all kinds of pathologies of intelligence. Really, that's what neurosis is. It's a defect in your intelligence. Because at the ego level, you don't even know who you are. So how intelligent can you be about anything else if you don't know that? So this is the problem, that we don't even know what intelligence is. The word itself comes from the Greek nous, which meant having to do with the soul, the true entelechy, the innermost being, which is the source of intelligence. So even the ancient Greeks, who were Aryans, whose civilization also descended from the yogis of ancient India, and still had that intelligence activated at the time of Plato and Socrates and the pre-Socratics. It began to be lost already, clearly, with Aristotle, whose intelligence was focused mostly on the phenomenal plane. In the ancient world, the Chaitanya was recognized as having two levels. One was the level having to do with Shiva's intelligence, and the other was Shakti's. There are two different kinds of intelligence. Shakti's intelligence has to do with the logic of worlds, because Shakti's purpose is creating universes. And therefore, it is the intelligence that has now become that of science. It figures out how do things work. What is the molecular structure? What is the quantum nature of the elementary particles? What is the nature of light? All of this. How does life energy flow? How do life forms get created and sustained, etc.? The whole logic of evolutionary development and devolutionary development as well of worlds is the province of Shakti. But Shiva's contribution to intelligence is to put poetry into the world. beauty, art, meaning-moreness. Because without that, the universe is meaningless. No matter how brilliant it may be structurally, without the heart intelligence that comes from that supreme, transcendent being, whose creation of the universe is itself an act of love and an act of joy, a lila, a play. It's that playfulness that has nothing to do with survival of the fittest. It has nothing to do with anything that we nowadays would consider to be important. You know, the humanities are not important. Poetry is not important. Beauty is not important. You know, what's important is creating nuclear reactors and bombs and bridges and dams and genetically modified organisms. All of that stuff that has to do with structure, but completely lacks wisdom. And so the intelligence that is actually wisdom, not just knowledge and not just capacity to calculate, is what we have lost. And the understanding of the nature of God in the ancient world was always that God is the supreme intelligence. That's why you worship God. Because you want to download some of that intelligence into your own mind so that you can live in an intelligent and wise way. But now with materialism and atheism, that intention has even disappeared. You're ridiculed for having that intention. But prayer was never about asking God for things. Give me a child, give me money, give me this. No, it was give me the intelligence to be able to live a wise life. And the intelligence comes from union with God. That's the meaning of yoga, is that your limited intelligence links with the unlimited intelligence and wisdom and heart-mind, the hridaya of the Supreme Being. So, because nowadays we have only a fantasy of intelligence, that A is based on the idea that intelligence is sourced in the brain rather than using the brain as an intermediary, and that it's only for pragmatic purposes, not for anything transcendent, the capacity to use our intelligence has been blocked off. And because we have not gone beyond what Wilson calls chapel perilous, which is that place in which the ego's intelligence fails, we never reach the point where we activate the real intelligence. It's only in phase 2 of the spiritual journey. Chapel perilous is the equivalent of the dark night of the soul, but it is specifically in the Wilsonian understanding, and it's a very important nuance, I think, of understanding the spiritual journey, which is a journey of the increase of our intelligence. That's what we're doing here. That's what this institute is about. That's why it's in the form of a school. We're increasing our intelligence, our ability to think clearly, and without internal conflict about the nature of reality in the greatest, vastest context that is possible to us, and step it down to be applicable to any given situation. But that chapel perilous is that point in which the ego's intelligence fails. It's that point of failure in which you cannot figure things out and you're totally lost, and the ego mind falls into anxiety because its brain mind is useless to get through a situation that cannot be grasped, cannot be mastered, cannot be understood. And for the ego, that's paranoia and anxiety. But when there is faith in the mind that transcends the ego, and there is a sufficient amount of courage to break through the limitations of the linear pseudo-intelligence of the limited mind, one can break through into the unlimited Shiva mind, which is able to grasp and grok any situation in its entirety, with all of its multidimensional, transcendental, and immanent dimensions to it. And so this is the reason for making this vision quest, which is really a quest of the higher intelligence. But because you reach this chapel perilous phase in which you reach anxiety, most people turn back at that point. And they prefer to trust the superego and the censor, which is holding back information and wisdom from them because they are loyal to the past, rather than to live in the unknown with the power of intelligence fully activated. And so therefore the ego plays games to try to control situations through weakness and stupidity and sickness and prejudice, or using chakra 3 bullying methods or whatever, rather than using intelligence as a way to live. But eventually chakra 3 doesn't work as a means of controlling your life. Chakra 2 doesn't work, seducing the other into doing what you want or that kind of thing. The chakra 1 method of weakness doesn't work. And there is no choice but making that journey to the higher intelligence of chakra 4 and 5 and 6, let alone to 7, where you will receive the light in its direct form prior to being translated into any of the forms of lower intelligence. Those of you who have been here a while know about the Milagro theory, right? At the top is the MIL, mathematics, imagery, language. That operates at the archetypal level. It's the first translation of pure Chaitanya intelligence into forms, structures, logics that can then be applied to the world. And these three are intertwined. So mathematics and imagery will combine into music, for example, which still contains the structures of both. Or in adding language, you'll get an opera, or you'll get some other form that maybe includes drama, and includes other ways of expressing this intelligence. And then that has to be filtered through the agro, affect, genius, which is that individuated downloading of unique insights, reason, the capacity to logically figure out the implications of what you have downloaded, and openness to ongoing recontextualization of everything you think you know, so that you are living always in the unknowable. And it's that where things are interesting, because it's that level of reality in which you must constantly be learning new things. You can't afford not to be. You cannot rest at any point. There has to be a continual flow state of opening to new wisdom in order to live in an accurate way. And any sense that you're somebody who knows something will already bring about karmic backlash. So, that's real intelligence. This film isn't about any of that. It's about the fantasy of intelligence. But it's important for us because A, it shows the Kali Yuga paradigm in which most of us were brought up, and B, it enables us to have a linchpin between that and the higher level that we're talking about. I think the most important figure in modern studies of intelligence is Timothy Leary, who was a Harvard professor, a psychology professor. Let's never forget that. And he got there for good reason. If you read his PhD dissertation, it's about intelligence. And he worshipped intelligence, literally. One of his books was even titled Your Brain is God. Not a bad book for the 60s. And although he became famous for his own brain boost through the use of LSD, what the LSD actually taught him was that LSD was not useful in going beyond the chapel perilous. And he gave it up. He stopped using LSD. After he told everyone else to turn on, tune in, and drop out, he actually dropped out in another way and went into studying of Eastern philosophy and meditation. And he was put in prison for a number of years where he had an opportunity to meditate, because that's all he could do. He was in solitary confinement. And he reached much higher states of consciousness than the acid ever took him to. And his last books on infopsychology and exopsychology, meaning extraterrestrial, brought him to an entirely new paradigm in which he was able to integrate these higher levels of intelligence. It's probably the best modern integrated synthesis of brain intelligence with transcendent mind that we have in the West. And of course, nobody knows about it because Leary got such a bad rap. But if you're reading this Wilson book on the cosmic trigger, you'll become aware of it, and then I recommend that you read Leary as well. But in any case, the intelligence that we're seeing in this story, which is Flowers for Algernon, by the way. I don't think I mentioned the title. How many people have seen the film or read the book? You've read the book. And seen the film?
I don't know if I've seen it.
Okay. Or they made a film in 1968 with Cliff Robertson called Charlie. Anyone see that? It's the same story, and Chaitanya gave me both copies, and it was a real battle in my mind. Which one do I show? And one's a bizarro version of the other. In some ways, Charlie is a better film, but only in some ways. And in most of the other ways, the ways that have to do with heart intelligence more than the simple scientific logic, the one we're going to see, I think, is a superior film. And if your intelligence is going to be boosted, why wouldn't it include your emotional intelligence and other aspects rather than just the pure cognitive ones? So, in any case, the story is about a guy with an IQ of about 60, apparently caused by phenylketonuria. Is that how you pronounce it? And scientists discover an operation that can undo the damage, and his intelligence rises to something like 200 or something. So it's interesting because, it's very difficult for an actor to play a really dumb person. I don't know if you've ever tried to do that, but people tend to overplay it and go just and misspell words and put the S backwards and do things that are too obvious and too laid on in a superficial way. That's not really what these lower levels of intelligence are about. But I like the character in this film because as dumb as he is, his heart is open. He's beautiful. He is a saint. He's a being of true greatness, as he is. And then when he achieves the intellectual greatness, he actually loses some of that heart-mind greatness because he gets seduced by the power of the cognitive dimension of his intelligence. So I think that's an important teaching of the film. In the other version, it's a much darker version where they're laughing at him and making fun of him in really sadistic ways, and his living environment is very, very bleak. And the film emphasizes, I think, the dark side of the story, whereas this film version emphasizes more the emotional and the spiritual dimension of this tragedy, you could say. And the tragedy is more in the gaining than it is of the loss. So I think that transvaluation of the values of being smart versus being what is conventionally considered to be not smart is an important lesson for us all. But what I think is most important in the film is the fact that the intelligence is used only to try to gain some chakra 3 power over the other, prestige. And ultimately he uses it to try to hold on to that intelligence when it starts slipping away. But what is our intelligence really for? What is its purpose? What is the whole reason why we would have been created with this intelligence? It has no great evolutionary value. In fact, it's leading to our extinction at the moment. So it has to have a value that's transcendent of anything localizable in a Darwinian mindset. So how do we understand and how do we increase our own intelligence? I think in some way, if we use this film as a model, but instead of looking at it as a horizontal increase in how do you figure out how to read difficult books and equations and mathematics and that kind of thing, but how do we reach God consciousness? How do we reach an intelligence that transcends the universe and that is the creative source of values and of powers and of the logic of recreating the world in a new way in which we are not going to go extinct, in which we figure out the problems that we have by transcending the level of consciousness that caused those problems. I think the story then has a much deeper significance. So it's an important parable for our times, because our lack of intelligence that goes beyond chakra 3 is the cause of all of our suffering, and I think of our endangerment as a species to no longer be able to survive. We know too much for our own good, but not enough for real goodness, and that's destroying us. Okay. Algernon. Why the name Algernon? Interestingly, if you look up the word, it comes from the Middle French, Algernon, which means someone with a mustache. Yeah. But it turns out that the royalty and the statesmen who were supposed to be the most intelligent ones in France in those days when the word came were ones who wore a mustache. So it does have something to do with intelligence, or at least the imaginary of intelligence. You know, the guy twirling his mustache, always having a sense of, aha, I've got you figured out. So there is something to that, but also the author of the novel used Algernon Charles Swinburne, a poet of the late 19th, early 20th century, who was a mystic, who used his intelligence actually to download some very important romantic but spiritual ideas into the canon of Western literature. But he's been almost forgotten in the modern age. I mean, how many of you have read Swinburne? Any of you? That's another sad story about our lack of intelligence as a culture in which we have forgotten our great poets. How many read Keats? How many read Shelley? How many read, any of the great romantic poets whose Wordsworth, even Blake, all of those have given us a kind of wisdom that we have let go of. And instead we're watching video games and doing other things with our intelligence that's actually dumbing us down. So if this inspires us to try to be more in touch with the legacy of intelligence, that is what culture is about, then it will have done a good job for us all. And it's a fact that the most intelligent human beings are the ones who downloaded the essence of spiritual traditions that we study here. And that's the reason we study them, and we don't study some other aspects of culture as much, because what we're studying here is the essence not only of the most intelligent insights of humanity, but of teachings of how to become more intelligent. That's really the essence of what we're studying. And I hope we take it seriously, that we can increase our intelligence, we must, and it's an imperative that we should on an ethical level, and it's doable simply through the surrender of the false intelligence of the ego. Namaste. Hope you enjoy the film. Let's have a 3-minute popcorn break or whatever there is out there.